Greetings and salutations, YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of Jay Fixes Stuff. You may remember this generator here, the recent star of the episode on the storm responder. Well, when I wasn't looking, it cloned itself. So in the recent episode of the home light generator, the other generator that I mentioned that I purchased from that flipper, it was this one. It's actually a newer version of this one. It was when the storm responder started to transition over to the Honda clone style. Now, right off the bat, there's some things here that aren't great. There's very little that I've even checked on this thing. We do, in fact, have compression. We do have a functioning recoil as opposed to the home light generator. However, this tank is just one big nightmare. And the flipper just threw a random gas cap on top of the tank like that. He said, I know this doesn't go to it, but I just put it there. So yeah, this gas tank is just a complete and total nightmare. There appears to be mud, perhaps rust, all kinds of nasty stuff down inside there. Not good. The other thing, there are no fuel lines coming out of that gas tank. There's no fitting on the bottom of the gas tank. It's just a tank with all kinds of problems and nothing else. So yeah. The governor arm does move, so at least the throttle plate on the carburetor is not stuck, but that's probably about all we do have going for us. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get this one running. However, I don't know if it's going to be cost effective to do so. This one also might end up being a parts machine just for the cost of the fuel tank. So we'll have to see if we can clean this thing up or not, or if we need to buy a whole new fuel tank. But you never know. Maybe we'll be successful in getting this thing back up and running. All right, so I just fired up the pressure washer, even though it is almost Christmas time, just to see if this thing had a tank that had any kind of redeeming qualities whatsoever. No, it's a total loss. So yeah, I took a pressure washer and actually put it inside the thing, and yeah, it's just awful. Nasty, nasty stuff. So looks like I'm gonna have to try to see if I can find one that is reasonably priced. Yuck. All right, so I just want to check the oil real quick just to see what we're working with here. Oop. And we are overflowing a little bit. We're overflowing a lot. Okay. Yeah. Yep, we have all kinds of fuel contamination in that oil. So, not good. All right, well, we can't try to start it like that. So let's get it inside. We'll clear that out. All right, welcome back to the shop. So as you probably saw outside, when I opened the oil fill, oil was just gushing out of there. And by oil, I mean all kinds of nasty stuff. It was not just oil. So when that happens, it is one of two things. Either somebody overfilled their oil, which on this type of a generator is pretty hard to do, because if it's coming out of the spot where you fill it, then you can't really overfill it beyond that point. So usually what it means is that either gas or water has gotten into the crankcase. In this case, let's hope it's gas. So if you have a carburetor where the needle and seat are not working properly, over time, gas can pass through there down into the crankcase, which is never a great thing. But when you get gas down into the crankcase, you don't want to try to start the engine like that. And more importantly, if you have a situation where you have so much gas contaminated oil that it's backed up too high, it can actually cause hydrolock, and it can damage the engine, make it smoke, all kinds of nasty stuff. I'm going to get this ready because we are going to use the pneumatic siphon to get this stuff out of here. All right, let's get it going. Yeah, it's flowing very fast, and it's chilly out today, so I don't know if you can see that in the line. Yeah, that is not oil. So let's do our first of probably many oil changes. When you have a crankcase that's contaminated by fuel, you really don't want to just do one oil change. So let's get that set up. And as you can see in the background, the wind is so crazy that it's actually blowing my weighted door with the spring-loaded hinges wide open, like over and over again. That's how crazy it is today. All right, so I checked the label, and this is a 2012 model. Now, the storm responders in 2006, they stopped putting the oil sensors on them, the low oil sensors. And then right around this vintage, this is 2012, and right around this vintage is when they started slowly converting over to using Honda clone parts. So in this one right here, we still have the traditional 10-horse Briggs & Stratton engine, which is really a great engine. But once they stopped putting those low oil shutoffs on them, people started blowing them up. Now for the gen head, the generator head on this is now using the Honda clone style. So this is kind of a Franken generator where they were in the process of converting over to completely Honda clone. So we have the traditional Briggs 10-horse engine, and then we have the Honda clone generator head. I've done 1,000 oil changes on these Briggs 10-horse, and off the top of my head, I don't remember what the oil capacity is, and I'm kind of too lazy to look it up today. I might have to get another measuring cup because this is now leaking all over the place when I'm pouring out of it. That never used to happen. Like, where is even, it's coming down the side of it. I just don't get it. That never used to happen. All right, so it didn't even need all that. I am pleased to announce that my new oil measuring cups have arrived, so hopefully no more spilling all over the place. All right, so now that we have some oil in this thing, what do you say we get it outside and just see if we can get it going for a second or two, just to get an idea if we have power or not and if this engine sounds okay or not. All right, so the winds are extremely gusty right now. And the last time I filmed in this kind of wind, the entire tripod and the camera just tipped right over and fell onto the ground. You can actually watch the Toro Recycler video if you want to watch that. It was a little bit of a train wreck. Okay, it was a lot of a train wreck. So anyway, I just pulled the Airbox cover off right here to be able to spray some carb cleaner in there to see if we can get this thing to run for a couple seconds. And I found that we don't have an air filter. So yeah, the whole inside of the Airbox is just dirty and gross. So I'm really hoping this does not run for very long with no air filter, because we might have some engine damage. All right, so we're gonna check. We do have a working governor arm. The throttle plate is not seized, so that's good. We'll go ahead and put the power to the on position. By the way, I just saw that the circuit breaker was turned off. So not sure what that's about, but I flipped that on. So here's what we're looking for right now. If we can get this to run just for a second or two, then we will be able to find out if this engine is any good, if it sounds good, and if we are trying to make power or not. So let's do that. All right, here goes. Engine sounded good, but I did not see any power. So let's try this again. All right. We are 0 for 2. So let's try one more time. And this time I'm going to try to squirt a little bit more to see if we can get it to a higher RPM. But it's not looking good so far. Actually, let's check and see if that circuit breaker tripped. Nope, circuit breaker is still on. And let's try a different outlet. All right, we are now in a different outlet. Confirm that the circuit breaker is on. The quick disconnects are in there good and tight. So let's try to see if we can get it going just a little bit longer and a little higher RPMs, just to give it one more chance. No, let's try it again. All right, so we do have an engine that is attempting to make power. And I forgot, this is the one that has the new Honda clone power head. So with the older style, it's much easier to get it to produce power because it's just coming through a bridge rectifier. So, all right, so that is promising. I think we have some potential here. That is, if we can find a fuel tank for this thing that is not $1 million. That is going to be what decides if it's going to be cost effective to fix this thing or not. Oh my gosh, it did tip over. All right, so just a quick parts update. The stock fuel tank? Nope, That's a non-starter. $560 plus shipping? Yeah, that generator is not even worth half of that. We're not doing that. So made an executive decision and I bought that one. It's gonna require a little bit of modification, but we'll make it work. So as you may or may not be able to notice, I've been doing a little bit of light cleaning on this thing just to pretty it up and get some of the grime off of there. But next I would like to tackle that. That chrome cover is just screaming for some attention. So let's see what we can do with that. So let me just get you in here so you can see the rust that we got going on in here. These chrome covers on the Briggs 10 horse, they love doing this. So we're gonna clean that up a bit. What is the secret weapon, you ask? Well, it's WD and level 000 fine steel wool. Now you can also use Scotch-Brite, however, it scratches up the chrome. So I prefer using the 000 steel wool. All right. Well, looks like the entire engine's getting a bath in WD. Okay.
Pieces scattered like a puzzle's grin. Where does it start? Where does it begin? Hands move steady, the rhythm's clear. Click, twist, turn, it's all in sync. Building dreams faster than you think. Step by step, yeah, it all aligns. Screws and bolts, they've got their place. Worn out tools, but they keep their grace. Dust flies up as the job gets done. Click, twist, turn, it's all in sync. Building dreams faster than you think. Step by step, yeah, it all aligns. A wobble here, a snap to there. Patience builds it with some care.
All right, so this is not going to remove all the years of neglect. You're going to have some deep pitting that are still going to remain after you're done cleaning it. And you can buy a new one. The part number is actually right on here. It's 189008. And last time I checked, while a bit pricey, it was still available. The problem is this. I have about an 80% break rate getting these things out of here. These bolts that hold on the outer exhaust shield to the rest of the muffler, they love to break off. So it's just really not worth it. So let me get you in there tight. Look how much nicer that looks from where we started to where we are now. So while we're over here, after what we found with the home light spark plug, why don't we check this one real quick? That was loose. That's probably not a great sign. Although the spark plug does look pretty new, so maybe the seller replaced it? Oh, it is a Champion. Yeah, it's an RC12YC. Yeah, it's relatively new. Terminals look nice. The color looks good. Don't have a ton of oil on there. So yeah, we're just going to reuse that one. That's not bad at all. We'll just check the gap real quick. All right, so we're just looking for this to be around a 30. Perfect. All right, let's pop this back in. We're going to tighten it a little better than it was before. All right, that feels good. All right, let's get that plug wire back on. All right. And this is what I was talking about before. It's like that seller just took the fuel line, and I guess I'm appreciative that he blocked it off, but he just stuffed like a flathead bit. Super strange. Well, it appears to have worked. I don't see a bunch of gunk inside that inlet. But you know what? Let's take off that carb anyway. Also, we're going to have to clean off this airbox over here because it was run without an air filter. All right, so let's get this choke handle out of here. You have to close the choke on these in order to lift it up out, and then it just lifts straight up out like that. All right. Let's check that breather hose. All right, breather hose feels really good, surprisingly. And yeah, not great. That's what happens when you run without an air filter. One of many things that happens. So we're gonna have to try to clean that up a bit. I'm gonna start off by throwing it in the ultrasonic and letting it soak. All right, next we need our Torx socket to get these studs off. You'll see they have a Torx fitting on the end of them. So it's the third one in. It is, it says an E6. And you have a little retainer clip on here. You have to move that over to the side, like so. And then you want to disengage the anti-surge spring, like so. And then you should be able to just lift up the governor rod, like so. Ooh. Now I know I'm going to jinx myself, but these storm responders, they are the favorite place for mice to build nests. And it's typically up underneath here and inside of here. So this is now 2 storm responders in a row where I have not seen a mouse nest, and that is unheard of. So I probably just shot myself in the foot by saying that. All right, so before we get into cleaning this thing up, I just wanted to quickly talk about Carb Cleaner. So if you watched my PB770 video or my SRM 2620T video, you probably saw this nasty stuff make an appearance and you heard me cursing it out every few seconds. It's because it's awful. This is super tech, and basically Carb Cleaner is Carb Cleaner, except for when it's this garbage, because you just touch that button right there and you get a fire hose coming out, and it's just no good for anybody. So this is now relegated to using it as starter fluid, basically. This is what I love. This is the good stuff. It's also cheap. It's gum out. You could also get pretty much anything except for that super tech garbage, like Berryman B12 is really good. Pretty much anything except for that stuff. All right, so let's dig into this carb. First, I just want to hose off the outside real quick. Although really, it doesn't look that grimy, a little oxidized. See how with this carb cleaner, you can just push it a little bit and you can determine your own flow. It's so much better. You can do it like that or just a little like that. All right, now these are JIS screws, so you're supposed to use the JIS screwdriver. However, those are never handy. They're never nearby. So usually a regular screwdriver will work. But if you find yourself starting to round it off or it's not coming, then you want to grab a JIS screwdriver, or you can put it in a vise gently and use a manual impact. I've had really good luck with those on Nikki's with the JIS screws. Okay. That feels like it's never been opened before, so that's a good sign. All right. Wow. Yeah, that's never been opened before. That's cool. Wow. Huh, that emulsion tube looks new. Look how shiny it is in there. That's crazy. Now with these Nikki carbs, they have this special proprietary gasket here, and you need to make sure that it is seated exactly the way that you take it off when you put it back together. And you'll see there are actually 2 different ones that you need to inspect. You have the main large one for the body, and then you have one small one right here. So that O-ring feels really good. Put it over here. And let's gently pick this up. All right, there we go. And yeah, that's in nice shape too. Cool. All right. Yeah, that bowl looks pretty decent. Surprising. That's the main jet right there. And it is clear. Hopefully you can see that. It is clear. That's great. All right. So I just quickly blew some carb cleaner through all the different orifices and everything went pretty well. There was only one passageway that was slightly blocked, and I poked a file through it and it freed it right up. So as far as the body of the carb, I think we can put that in the ultrasonic to soak. All right, and All right, so the needle does have just a small ridge, it looks like, on there, which may affect its sealing. So after we clean this thing up, we're gonna have to check and see if this needle is still good or not. Oh, actually that looks better after I wipe that off. Looks like we just had a little gunk on there. Cool. Yeah, needle's looking good now. Okay. All right, and I don't remember which one of these goes where. It's been a little while since I've cleaned this. So we're just gonna spray it through everywhere. All right, no blockages in this thing. So we'll set that off to the side. All right. Add some of the secret ingredient, the mean green. Oh, used up that one. Good thing I keep a bunch of this stuff. Guess it wouldn't hurt to throw the float in, why not? All right, so I have it set up for 10 minutes and we are set to 60 degrees Celsius. I guess let's give it a shot. Ultrasonic, do your thing. All right, so as you probably noticed, partway through, maybe 3 minutes into the ultrasonic cycle, I decided last minute to toss this airbox cover in. And it did get the dirt off, but it's really sun faded. So this is just telling us this really has done some time outside. So that's not great. And as far as the airbox backing, it's much better. All the dirt is off and all the gunk and sticky stuff is off. However, because there wasn't an air filter in there, you can see there's all kinds of staining and pitting. It's just not great. So neglecting your equipment, this is what happens. But as far as the carburetor goes, that is in much better condition. There's still a little bit of staining on there as well, but it's clean now, so it should be functional in theory. Bowl looks nice. All right, so I have everything all laid out here so that we can get this carburetor thrown back together quickly. And it is important that before you assemble this carburetor that you inspect the gasket and the O-ring. Make sure that they are free of any kind of defect. Those are very important for the seal. Okay, we'll get that O-ring on first. Okay. All right, that's good to start off. And you want to drop your main jet down into the middle. Really, we probably should have done that before we put the gasket in place. And to make sure that it seats well, you want to use something like this. This is a Tecumseh carburetor tool, but anything that's similar to that, just to make sure that it seats properly. You generally want to leave it in this orientation until you get the carb body back in place. And then when you do that, the emulsion tube that sticks out of the carb body will hold that main jet in place. All right, so now you just line up that hole with that hole. Okay. Make sure your gasket is seated properly. That looks good. And we just need to get our needle and float and pin back in there. All right, we'll slide the needle into the float. It just kind of hangs out there, it doesn't lock in, there's no spring or anything. Okay. Okay, that feels good. Okay, you just want to do a visual inspection and make sure the gasket didn't move on you. And we're looking good. That throttle plate was moving, but it was kind of dragging a little bit. So I just sprayed a little PB blaster and now it's moving nicely. So, all right, so let's reassemble what we're able to reassemble at this point, since we're still waiting on that fuel tank. Okay, we got our gasket in place, the carbs in place. Got the studs started. All right, carbs on. Well, I forgot to put the governor rod back on. You guys just watched me do it. Nobody said anything at all. Well, I've never tried to do this with it on there. I wonder if you can. All right, that clip is back on. Governor rod is back in place. Anti-surge spring's good. So I just realized that we were actually missing one of the correct nuts on here, like these flanged style. They were using that for some odd reason. I don't know if somebody lost it or what the deal was, so we've corrected that. All right, so now we just want to put our choke handle back on, and remember the choke has to be closed in order to get that in there. Because when it's open, it won't allow it to vibrate out like that. All right, now we got to get our breather hose in. Okay, breather hose is in. All right, this is what was supposed to be in there. All right. And I do have a sticker for this, so we'll put that on afterwards. All right. So that's pretty much all we can do at this point until the fuel tank arrives. If we really wanted to be impatient, we could plumb this up into our shop tank just to run it and see how it does with making power. But I'm gonna try to be patient. I'm gonna try to wait until this thing is done before we do any testing on that. I will turn you back on once we get the gas tank in, and that's not gonna be fun because at the very least we're gonna have to paint it, and it really is too cold to be painting things, so it's not great. The other thing is we're gonna have to do a little fabrication here because the new one, the dimensions are off by about 1 inch or so, but it's really the only option that we had. All right, so I'm just giving you a quick sneak peek update here. As you can see, the tank has arrived. However, it was a bright red, which is not going to work with this generator. So I have given it a couple, okay, by couple I mean 3 different coats of a gasoline proof matte black finish, which I figured should go pretty well. However, the stupid spray can gave 2 big drops of paint right here. I then waited for it to dry and sanded it with fine sandpaper. And for some bizarre reason, it turned a shiny black sanding it, which makes no sense whatsoever. So I am going to make another attempt to sand this, maybe even with a dual action orbital sander. And then I'm going to hit it again with the matte gasoline resistant finish, which you really want when you're doing a gas tank. You don't want it to take the paint off if somebody spills gas, because there's a pretty good chance somebody's going to spill gas at some point. So that's kind of where I am right now. Next, I have to figure out a way to support the tank properly. So I'm likely going to weld in some extensions here to support the holes for the tank. But as you can see, there's not really a great way to do that. So that's where I'm at right now. So I will turn you back on once I have a little bit of progress to share. All right, so just a quick update. I have been working hard and this is what I came up with. I fabricated some extensions for those rails. I then welded them all in place. I then drilled new holes for the bolts. And rather than doing the easy thing, which several times I definitely questioned my own sanity and then kind of wished I did do the easy thing, and just putting a bolt through with a nut on the backside, I did it the right way, and I actually tapped those out to match the existing bolts that were previously used on this generator, which was an 8mm by 1.25 thread. So the hard thing about that was that look how close that tab is to the rails. That was not easy to get a tap in there. And I have primed the part that's going to be under the tank that nobody can see and masked it off to prevent any rust. Now, the problem with all of this is that there is no paint commercially available that is remotely similar to this color. And there are all kinds of nicks and whatnot that really make me want to paint this. But the problem is that it is wintertime and I really could not get a good paint job even if I could find the right color, which I can't. And I'm tempted to just paint the entire frame like a jet black, like a shiny, maybe a semi-gloss black. But then people are going to be like, bro, why is your storm responder black? So I don't really have a good answer to that. And I think I'm most likely just going to have to leave it the color that it is. And the part that I've primed is going to end up being below the tank, so no one's going to see that. But I still don't like this nonsense. Yes, I got like the surface rust off of there, but I really don't like leaving it like that. So that's where we are right now. And next I have to attack the tank. So I am going to sand that down and make one more attempt at the flat black before we end up saying screw it and going to a semi-gloss. All right, so another update. I have repainted this thing and I'm hoping it's going to come out well this time, because I'm getting tired of painting this thing. So as you can probably see, the paint is done. I have the gas tank back together again, and I'm about to mount it back on here. However, for some odd reason, it still looks stupid. I have painted it multiple times, and yet that finish still looks weird over there. So I've basically given up at this point. Basically, it's either leaving it with that little bit of gloss there or just making the entire thing semi-gloss. But it really needs to be fuel resistant, so I'm just going to leave it like this. right, one remounted gas tank. Now we need to set up some fuel lines for this thing. All right, let's get this fuel filter and shutoff valve installed. Now, the only problem is that Honda uses a 3/16 usually, and I'm pretty sure this carb is a 1/4. So I might need to get a reducer fitting. Let's check on that. Yeah, as I feared, that is a 3/16 fitting, but the carburetor takes a 1/4 inch, so we are going to need to set up a reducer. All right, so here's what I've come up with. We have a 3/16 line right here. We have a 3/16 to a 1/4 reducer fitting right here. A couple of small 3/16 clamps right here. We have a 1/4 inch clamp here. So that's what we're looking like at this point. This will go onto the fuel shutoff fitting, and that should fit nicely onto the Nikki carburetor. So, not terribly pretty, but it's either that or buy like a custom $35 hose that has the 2 different sizes all in one, which seems like kind of a waste of money for this old generator. All right. Okay, that's on there. Slide the clamp up. All right, clamp is in place. That clamp is in place. Oh, I forgot a clamp over here. All right. I mean, really, this fitting is pretty tight, so I probably wouldn't even really need one, but let's do it. All right. All right. So hopefully the camera can see this here. All right, now slide the clamp down like so. All right. So our new tank should now be plumbed in, and our fuel shutoff should be working in theory. So we're missing a couple stickers, and this sticker doesn't stick, so I just put a little bit of glue on the back. And I'm going to try to get this back on here. A little crooked, but better than no sticker, I guess. And I don't like that this choke is not labeled. So I have this spare sticker here, which is now sticking to my finger. So we now have a choke sticker and an air filter cover sticker. So at this point, we have no idea if this carburetor is going to run this engine, if this engine is going to run well and play nice, or if this is going to make reliable power. All we've seen is just a flicker out of the light bulb when the power briefly flickered, and that's pretty much it. So I think it's time to get this thing outside and do a test on it. All right, so as you can see, everything is all set up for our first load test. Now, we don't know if this thing is going to run on this carburetor. We don't know if it's going to flood over. We don't know if it's going to make power, but we got to try, right? So here's what we have set up. We have an 1800 watt space heater. We have another 1800 watt space heater. We have a 1500 watt space heater. We have an amp probe set up so that we can find out what the total harmonic distortion is to see what kind of power we're putting out. And we have the kilowatt right here. So we'll be able to check, see what the engine speed is, check the hertz, check the voltage that it's putting out, hopefully anyway. So let's give this thing a try. All right, so let's see if this thing feels like starting. All right, choke is on. Fuel shutoff is on. Power is on. All right, here we go. Oh, there it goes. Wow, that's interesting. All right, so our governor spring just snapped, which is bizarre, and we weren't putting out any power. So I don't know if that is because it was running so low or what the deal is. So this just got a whole lot more interesting. Well, the breaker was actually off. So I don't know if that tripped or if I bumped it when I was hooking up the 240 output here. So all right, so the engine runs well and sounds pretty good. However, without that governor spring, we're not going anywhere. After resetting the circuit breaker, I just found that we are making power. When I manually put it up to the 61.5 hertz that it should be running at by hand, it was only putting out about 113 volts. So I have a feeling once we get that governor spring installed and all set up, we're most likely going to have to adjust the AVR a little bit. So looks like we still have some work ahead of us here. I will get a parts order in and then we'll check back. All right, boys and girls, just a quick parts update for you. I tried ordering our needed governor spring only to find that it is discontinued. So over the last few days, I've tried experimenting with a few different governor springs and none of them would run the engine properly. So I thought pretty much all was lost until today when I was out to breakfast with some friends, Kenny from Ken Small Engines on YouTube, Hank from Big Dog Repair, and the one and only James Condon. Now, fortunately for us, James Condon just happened to have this governor spring lying around, which is going to save this project. So we can now install this, which is great. Now, one other thing I should point out is this. I noticed in doing some test runs, trying to make some different governor springs work, that the engine is actually running really rich. That's usually an indication that someone used an aftermarket Nikki carb, because most of the aftermarket carbs for this engine don't run well and they run extremely rich, which is what I'm seeing here. The other giveaway that it's most likely an aftermarket carb and not a good aftermarket is the play in this choke. And I think this is a poor aftermarket. So I'm thinking after all that work that we did on this carburetor, it might be time to throw a different carburetor on this. And with all the different aftermarket carburetors that I have tried for this engine, I have only found one supplier that works well. So we can try that. The only thing that I don't like about the aftermarket carbs that do usually run the engine well is the choke handle that comes out of the top. It by default is a big, long, tall one that requires you modifying this top plate. So I'm not in love with that, but it does run the engine well. So let's get this governor spring on here. And I should probably use these. All right, we want it in one of these two holes, the front or the back of number 5. All right, and we're going to bend the tab forward just a little bit. This has a very simple engine speed adjustment. It's simply a matter of bending this tab forward or back until you get it where you want it. So we're going to start off with that and see how that runs it, and then we will adjust it as necessary. All right, so I'm just going to very quickly fire this up and just check and see what the engine speed looks like and make sure that this spring is going to work. And we're also going to check and see if this is still running rich. All right, so let's turn the fuel shutoff on. We have the choke on, although maybe you can see that slop I was talking about. There is a detent spring on the back there that you sometimes can adjust, but I don't know if it's gonna cut it in this case. Anyway, I have the kilowatt set up, so we will be able to see what the engine speed looks like. I guess I'll set it right there. I won't be able to run this long because I am inside, but I would just like to see how this is gonna work. So let's get the power on, give it a pull. A little slow. All right, we've aired it out in here and we are back down to 0 parts per million of carbon monoxide. Again, just a reminder that you should not run a generator inside or anywhere near your living area. All right, let's get this off of here. And this is what I was talking about, the detent with the choke. It's not where it's supposed to be. It's like bent back. So short of taking that whole choke plate and that rod out of there, you can't really fix that because it's just going to be up against there. You'd have to take that whole thing out, bend that back, and I still don't think that's going to fix our running rich problem. So what I'm thinking, I do have another carb, so let's try that. So the issue with this carb is this. It's the choke lever, and this is how that detent's supposed to look. See, it's nice and crisp. If you look over in this one, not even making contact. So that could be part of why it's running rich, because it's not staying fully open on the choke, but I don't think it's just that. I think this is most likely just a bad aftermarket. So this is a better aftermarket, but I'm still not in love with that choke control. And the other thing is, in order to use the choke control that comes on this, as I said, the top plate on that backing has to be cut out or modified because it can't fit up inside of there. And this kit does come with some different handles to go on there in place of that. However, they don't fit properly. So this would be the one most similar to the one that we use, but if I remember correctly, the way these notches are cut, it faces the wrong way. All right, I believe if we take that choke plate all the way out, that whole thing will come out. Ow! And then the way that should work would be this would come through here, and then the other part would snap onto that. But if I remember correctly, it will only snap that way, and it needs to go the other way. Maybe they fixed it. Let me try. Nope. It only fits together in that direction, which would be like that. Yeah, the choke would be operating backwards, which might work, but it really should be in the front orientation. All right, I'm thinking I'm going to be able to reuse the old handle on the new choke rod like that. So I think if we go something like this, and then put the choke plate in there. All right, I think I found a winning combination here. If we use that handle with this choke setup and this carb, hopefully it'll run well. And the choke, as you can see, functions a whole lot better than the one that was on it, or still is on it. Let's get that off of there. It's like deja vu. Now, if I remember correctly, this might need to be drilled out, the plastic on this one. Yeah, I think that plastic guide that the governor rod sits in, yeah, it's just a little too small. Actually, this kit comes with a new governor rod, and it fits pretty much perfectly. So maybe we'll just compare the two, and if they're close, we will just put a new governor rod on. We might need to recalibrate it though. All right, I'm also gonna replace the anti-surge spring. So let's get that in there, if I can see what I'm doing. And I believe that's supposed to go in from the bottom. Hey, we're in, okay. And now we should be able to hook it up. All right. All right, we get our studs, our gasket, and the carb all lined back up. Okay, so carb is back on. Yeah, choke's working a lot better now. Let's get the fuel line back on. All right, now if I remember correctly, with this carb, the choke plate kind of sticks out a little further than the factory one. So if I remember correctly, I had to use 2 gaskets to space it properly. And I'm gonna see if that's the case or not here. Okay. And I'll just try the handle here to make sure that it works before we secure it. Well, it appears to be working. So if you try this aftermarket, and I guess I'll link in the description just because it's the only one I found that works well, and I'm not being sponsored by anyone, just sharing information. If you use that one, maybe if you run into that situation, just throw an extra gasket in. See, now it works well. So just a matter of throwing that little tiny gasket in and then everything works well. Okay, we'll get this button back up. Oh, it feels much better. All right, while we're letting that carb fill up, let's get that retainer clip back onto the governor rod. I almost forgot that. There we go. And it should be interesting to see if we have to recalibrate that or not. All right, that should have enough fuel in it. So let me just reposition the camera and then we will fire it up and see if it works. All right, power is on, choke is on, fuel is on. We have our kilowatt, I'll position it here. All right, let's give it a pull and see what we're looking at here. Have our pliers standing by to adjust the governor. All right, here we go. So just to quickly go over the test that we just did, now that it has been aired out in here and carbon monoxide is back down to 0 parts per million, this ran the engine well, as I know they do. It had a little bit of occasional popping in the background, but it's not going to affect how it runs. And as far as the aftermarket carbs go for these Briggs 10-horse engines, it is the best that I've seen out of any of them. But it was running the engine very well, and we have a very nice working choke now. The governor, we don't need to calibrate it, or at least it doesn't appear as though we do, because I was able to adjust it right to around 61.5. And it was doing well. Now the voltage, as you saw on the camera, was only around 113. So we are going to need to open up the generator head and adjust that AVR. All right, so as I said before, this is one of the newer style Briggs power heads that actually uses the Honda clone style of generator head. As such, it has an automatic voltage regulator, which has a potentiometer on it where we can adjust it. However, I've never adjusted one of these potentiometers. So, all right, so as I said, I have never adjusted one of these specific ones before. So if the camera can see it here, that's the potentiometer. And it's different on all different styles. On some, a half a turn can get you 10-20 volts difference, and on other ones, a full turn only gets you 2 volts. So I'm just gonna try a half a turn clockwise and see what it gets us. All right, that's roughly half a turn. Let's see what that does for us. All right, choke is on, fuel is on, power is on. All right, so that didn't really get us a whole lot of movement on the voltage. So let's try doing 2 full turns clockwise. It's 1. 1.5. That's roughly 2. All right, let's try that again. Choke back on. All right, engine's sounding good and we're getting close. So I'm going to do one more full turn clockwise. All right, here we go. Run test number 598. All right, so the engine is sounding good. The engine speed is roughly where we want it, 61.8, just slightly higher than I like it, but that should be fine for this. And the voltage, we're at 120.8 last I saw, which should be good. So let's get this AVR back in here, get the generator head button back up, get this outside, and let's give it a test. All right, boys and girls, it is my favorite time of any generator project, and that is the load test. So this is a very similar test to the last storm responder project that we did, Over here we have an 1800 watt space heater right next to it, same exact thing, which brings us to 3600 watts. And then right next to it is its little brother, a 1500 watt space heater. The three of those space heaters together is 5100 watts. And then over here we have a 100 watt incandescent light bulb. So add a total of those four things and we will be at 5200 watts, and this is rated for 5500 continuous running watts. And over here we'll be able to check the THD, the quality of the power, total harmonic distortion. And right here, as you've already seen, we will be able to check the engine speed as well as the voltage as we go. So without any further ado, let's fire this thing up. All right, choke is on, fuel is on, power is on. Give it a pull. All right, there's 100 watts. We are starting off at only 4.6% THD, 121 volts. And engine speed went up a little bit, 62.2. All right, let's bring on a load. That's 1900 watts. We're at about 10% THD, 11%. And let's bring on another 1800 watts. And we're up to around 17% THD. We're holding at 120 volts, 60 hertz, looking good. Let's bring on that final 1500 watts. All right. We're holding at 59 hertz, 118 volts, 19% THD. Not bad. All right, let's start bringing the load down. Down to 4% THD, 121 volts, and the engine speed's still a little high at 62. Outstanding. That was a really good test. So as you can see, the paint job came out pretty good. Not perfect, but much better than the nasty thing that we had on there when we started. This engine is running extremely well. Now, as I said before, aftermarket carburetors for the Briggs 10 horse engine, they don't do well. They all run rich, they pop, they run not well at all. As you can see, this engine just purred. It did really well. So as I said, I'm not sponsored by the brand of carburetor that I used on this one. I don't even know what it is, but I will link it just so that you're able to use it yourself. So yeah, that was a great load test. As you could see, if you recall in the last storm responder video that we did, the total harmonic distortion, the amount of distortion in the power, the quality of the power, was actually lower on the older style Briggs power head. So although this is a newer, more modern style, we were actually putting out a little cleaner power with the original style, the earlier generation storm responder. But this ran really well. It made great power, and I think this would make a really good generator for someone. So that's pretty much it. I want to thank you for stopping by and hanging out with me today, and we'll see you next time.